Women in Focus, a podcast by British Naturism. Hello and welcome to Women in Focus, a podcast brought to you by British Naturism. I'm your host Helen Berryman and welcome to February 2026. It's cold, it's raining. The rain is set to stay for the foreseeable, which is why I'm packing up and heading off to the Bare Necessities cruise. Hopefully I'll be able to bring you details of my adventures on the cruise in the not too distant future. So today is episode 27 and we return to the conversation with Annebella Pollen. This is part 2, so let's welcome back Annebella. I think people want to see themselves now.
Yeah.
Within magazines. Real people want to see real bodies. Did you find that, you mentioned that you sort of looked up to about the 70s. Is that where your research ended?
I did do some research because the front and the end of the book are kind of where we are now. So I needed to have a sort of view from the hill, if you like, where I could kind of look across, 100-year history. So the main focus of the 3 main chapters are 20s to the 70s. And I stopped in the 70s partly because that was a moment when the nude body in public culture went everywhere. So the idea that the Naturist magazine, the Naturist publication had any kind of hold on that sort of representational domain, on that kind of domain of the naked body really shifted. And I also didn't want to look at porn in a really big way. And that was when the kind of boundary broke around what porn was and what it could show. There was a sort of new, a new dawn for what was possible in porn. So for various reasons, I stopped there. It sort of fitted with the feminist critique that I was also kind of taking all the way through because feminist voices started coming in very prominently in the 70s in a way that they had only come in a small way earlier. So many reasons I stopped there, but I did spend some time looking at nudist magazines from the millennium. And I found that really instructive because, there were sort of moments of critique develop. And because of nudism sort of reaching a point at the millennium where it was saying, where are we now? We're entering a new century. Where have we come from? Where are we going? It was a kind of moment of reckoning where there was a moment of self-reflection. I mean, the reason that I looked so much at that period was that my partner cleared a house of a former nudist who had a completely comprehensive collection of every single copy of Health and Efficiency magazine and other naturist magazines for about a 10-year period from about 1995 to about 2005. So I had this really nice little snapshot. But yeah, I enjoyed those articles that were saying, where have we come from and what's changed? Where are we now? And it really kind of instructed me from a sort of naturist point of view about what the kind of new voices were doing at the start of the 21st century. They're saying, what do we want to leave behind? What's staying the same? And some of the debates about whether nudism or naturism was continuing to perpetuate a kind of heterosexual culture, what the role of queer bodies, queer members, gay members, lesbian members was, that was kind of reaching a peak then. The role of women was sort of still under discussion. Why are there so few women? Why has this not moved on? That was kind of becoming, a point of reflection. People talking about why is naturism so white? We live in these multicultural societies, but naturism is a very white domain. Why is that the case? Why aren't people joining? And discussions around photographs. Who gets photographed? Who's doing the photography? What kind of bodies are photographed? Especially around perfect bodies and imperfect bodies, able bodies and disabled bodies. So I found that gave me a really good perspective to kind of look back over the previous century and to kind of look forward at what those hopes were. There was a sort of moment of hope, wasn't there, where people say, we're going into the 21st century. This happens across loads of organisations. What are we going to be? Where are we going? And so I found that kind of a useful sort of staging post. And then I also looked, at the time I was writing, I was gathering up everything that I could find that was coming out of British Naturism as a membership organisation. I was looking at up-to-date issues of magazines. And that was where I was finding, oh, look, there's a Women in Naturism group that has been formed to find out why there are so few women in naturism, what women want and need from naturism. So that was really useful. So I was like, oh, look, it's a 2020 concern and it was a 1920 concern. You've got this like perfect
Oh,
100-year stretch. And the same things are kind of coming through. And I remember I gave a talk when the book came out for the sort of British Naturism online talk series. And I think you were in the audience.
I was, yeah.
And you said, oh, it's so interesting to hear some of these things you're talking about, because they so echo where we are today and the things we're still talking about today. So 100 years on, there's still some of the same discussion points going round and round. So I was really interested in what you said there, because I thought some things are completely different, but some things are exactly the same.
Well, that leads us nicely to the next part I was going to ask you, actually. So about women, really, from your research, how present were women's voices in the early naturist movement?
Interestingly, they are part of the discussions and part of the organisations right from the very beginning. But I would say that generally they're in a minority position. So the very first naturist camp, the first meeting of the Gymnosophical Society, the Gymnosophy Society, there were women as well as men there. It was always mixed. It was something that women were also interested in, but they were in smaller numbers. I mean, the very first camp, we're talking about 1924, there was about 10 people. So we're just talking about a small, very small group. But one of the books that I really got very interested in, it was by a US author. He's from New York State, Maurice Parmelee.
Oh, yes.
And he wrote this book in 1929, I think it was, called Nudism in Modern Life, the New Gymnosophy. And he did this kind of big survey about nudism and where it was at in the 20s, going to Germany, as many international nudists did, because, it's most established there. And he said something really interesting about women that I just thought was really fascinating, kind of reading it, almost 100 years after it came out. But he said, gymnosophy is a powerful aid to feminism because it abolishes the artificial and unnecessary sex barrier and distinction of dress. And he said the gymnosophic movement is indeed the logical continuation and consummation of the women's movement. So he's meaning the women's movement to get the votes and for equal rights. He says it at last brings women into the man's world and it brings man into the women's world so that they can see each other as they really are. And he says women have more to gain from gymnosophy or nudism. And that is also because it gratifies their desire to see male nudity. And men, he said, had other opportunities to kind of see women's naked bodies elsewhere, but women had no other means to do so. So I found that a really extraordinary claim, so radical that he was saying, on the one hand, it gratifies women's desire. So women have got this curiosity to see naked male bodies and they can't elsewhere, but they can in a club situation. But also that he saw it as essentially a feminist movement. And he was arguing, what could be more feminist than bringing men and women together and stripping away all the kind of social barriers that keep them apart. I just found that really mind-blowing because if you asked me what kind of knowledge had I gone into the study with, and I said almost nothing except for the cliches, that was something where I thought I had no idea that people would be describing nudism as a feminist movement. So he's a male voice, but he's arguing for it being feminist. And then when I started looking at the kind of early magazines as they emerged, I discovered that there were lots of female writers and they came from a whole range of different backgrounds. So they were people whose writings I knew from alternative education for children. So they might have been campaigners and teachers of kind of child-centered educational methods. So teaching children in the open air, designing curricula that was suited to children's wants and needs rather than sitting them in strict rows and making them kind of learn things by heart. So people who were experimental child educators, they tended to be women. They had really strong ideas about the value of naturism for educational purposes and for child development. Then there were sex reformers and sort of sex educationalists. There were women who were arguing for better education for women, better access to contraception and abortion, better kind of knowledge about the facts of life in the general population. In the 1920s, there was extreme ignorance in the general population about where babies came from. So some of these women, they were campaigning for sex education. They were also campaigning for naturism, Many of them were practitioners, even if they dared not say so, but they were writing for magazines in support of it. So their support was explicit in that way. So there were feminists of various kinds. There were also photographers. I found that really interesting. So women were so commonly depicted in the magazines as the subject matter. They were the photographic subjects everywhere, but they were also photographic producers. So there were women who were taking the photographs, and some of those women had fascinating life stories. I write about some of these women in the book. Edith Tudor Hart, I got really fascinated by. She was an Austrian emigre to England. She'd left Austria in 1933 during the period where a lot of Central Europeans were fleeing Nazi rule. She came to Britain and she brought these ideas and practices from Austria, so nude bathing, which had been common there. But she also brought kind of left-wing politics. And it was really interesting to me to see how many of these feminist writers, photographers were also kind of social reformers, socialists. In her case, she was an outright communist with a capital C. So while she was photographing for nudist magazines, she was also raising consciousness about, working class predicaments and cultures in Britain. And she was spying for the Soviet Union, and she was recruiting other people to spy for the Soviet Union. So I was like, this is really extraordinary. You've got sex campaigners, experimental thinkers, communist spies, lesbians or gay women who were writing about, their experiences in nudist camps. So it's this really, really diverse set of voices. And I had expected none of that. And it was so interesting to hear their perspectives on it, because they're often writing about what's in it for women. Why would women do this? And, many of them were sort of campaigning from a feminist perspective about it being a place where women could find equal rights with men, where women could achieve some sort of liberation. So I was really surprised by that.
Well, it's absolutely true as well. I mean, I've often said that within a naturist environment, mixed gender, I become gender blind. I no longer see man, woman, whatever. I see people.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. But, it takes a little while to get there. But genuinely, I just see people now. It's how it should be,
I don't think I've ever achieved that. And I'm not sure whether I could ever achieve that. I think I've become more conscious of my body rather than less conscious. I know a lot of people say that they sort of achieved that neutrality, but I'm not sure that I've ever got there. A lot of the articles interesting in kind of mid-century Britain about nudism is trying to convince doubtful wives to join.
Yeah, it was still the case.
Yeah, there'd be many, many articles saying my wife won't join, women won't become nudists. Articles by women saying, I joined, I was skeptical, this is how I became a convert. Often it was their male partner who had instigated the interest, and they had kind of thought, what's in this for me? So I found those interesting to read, kind of women who were saying, like you're saying, I was self-conscious, but I found some kind of equality there, and I found a community that was really embracing and sort of encouraging others to kind of come forward. But there was also, we're talking about a period when there was a massive risk. If you were discovered to be part of one of these clubs, somebody could, blackmail you about it. They could besmirch your reputation. If you were considered to be used goods, you might find it hard to marry. There's a whole set of kind of moral dimensions that we still live in a moralizing world, but it's a different set of morals now. So I think women did have quite a lot to lose by joining a naturist club. And there were always far fewer of them. And I know that's something that is still to some extent the case now, that there are fewer women who join naturist organisations than men.
Yeah, you may be right in terms of actually qualifying numbers, but when you're at a festival or something like that, there are plenty of women there.
Yeah.
It may be that they don't want to be photographed. It may be they don't want to go in a magazine or be public, and that's absolutely fine. I wrote an article once called Men Shut Up, because I do get tired of hearing men going, where are all the women? Where are all the women? Well, appreciate the women that you have got participating in these events and being present, and don't bemoan those that are there. They are there. They're not, they're present. And naturism means something different to everybody. Everybody gets something different out of it. For me, it is the authenticity, not being judged on how I look, whether my body is conforming to societal normalizations. I mean, as a young woman in my 20s and 30s, that's exactly what my benchmark was, to look like all these people I saw in the magazines or on the telly. But as you get older and your body changes through either childbirth or then what happens to your body after you've breastfed or now menopause, I should have appreciated my body when I was 20 when it was looking its best, because it's never going to do that again.
Yeah. And a certain kind of confidence comes with older age. You know, it's one of the privileges of aging, at least for some people. It's, you know, a lack of concern about what other people think of you and, you know, maybe a sort of some kind of acceptance that comes in. So I think that is really interesting, because when your body is perhaps at its most perfect is when you've perhaps got the least confidence and less certainty about who you are. So yeah, it's complex. I really like the sort of new cultures that are emerging around women's swimming groups. We've got one local to me called the Blue Tips Sea Swimming Group. I think it's got a brilliant name.
Especially in the winter.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, wild swimming and sauna clubs and things like that, you know, it's women, often middle-aged women doing it together and really sort of enjoying that kind of liberation that it gives them. So, yeah, there's obviously different kinds of cultures and different kinds of formations that appeal to women in different ways.
There's a lot to be said for women actually getting together in any sort of scenario. But we, 2 years ago, started women-only clothing optional holidays, which have been quite successful. They've been very successful, actually. And we've actually had new women come along, curious, you know, what's it all about?
Yeah.
And it's the sisterhood, the camaraderie, the being authentic, seeing other women's bodies, like you mentioned, without making comparison. Or if you do, then it would be like, oh, that's perfectly normal. Mine must be normal too.
Yeah.
You know, and seeing that sort of vulnerability to a degree at first with these women that you barely know, and you end up leaving as friends. It's amazing. I can't quite articulate it.
Yeah. I think it's also something about intergenerational relationships. I've always found it really beneficial and really joyful to have friends across the ages. I've often had friends who are 20, 30, 40 years older than me. And I found it just, you know, really refreshing to see different perspectives. And as I said about that kind of swimming pool, collective changing room experience, to see women's bodies at different stages of life, you know, I think it's good for all of us to have those experiences. They're for everyone's benefit. It kind of creates these sort of intergenerational communities and kind of cross-cutting conversations that I always benefit from. It's one of the things I really enjoy about teaching is, you know, teaching young people in their late teens and 20s, and it kind of helps me sort of understand different perspectives on the world. It's a great privilege of a teacher to be able to have that access to young people's cultures. Of course, we get it through our kids if we've got them a little bit, but yeah, I really value those cross-sectional, cross-generational practices.
I need Urban Dictionary to talk to some of our children.
Yeah.
That used to mean something else.
Yeah. I mean, I totally get it wrong all the time. I can't make any attempt to be down with the kids because I will always create some massive embarrassment. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You're like 2017, Mum. Am I? Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I won't try. In your findings, when you've been looking at the archives and photographs in particular, and the magazines, do you think women were judged differently to men, morally or visually?
Oh, yeah, fundamentally, all the time. Yeah. Women are always judged on their appearances.
And still?
Yeah, absolutely. In every domain. And women do it to one another, of course, as well. But it's fundamental that women's appearance is part of the discussion. And also, looking back into the sort of 20th century, women were also quite invested in seeing themselves as fundamentally different to men, even if they wanted equal rights. There were sort of discourses about what women were good at and what men were good at, women's way of seeing the world being different from men's way of seeing the world. So this kind of gender differentiation is so fundamentally baked in to all aspects of culture. It's fundamentally baked into nudist culture, because nudist culture is always, to some extent, going to reflect the culture at large. Of course, there are some ways in which it's doing things fundamentally different, taking your clothes off in a clothed world being the most obvious. But yeah, I think some of the kind of nudist discourses, even coming from women, perceive that they've got different approaches to the same practice. So I think women are judged differently by men. They're not taken so seriously by men, especially you looking back into earlier in the 20th century. It's a time when women are not well represented in professions, when women are not typically cultural producers. They're not journalists to the same extent. They're not photographers to the same extent. So they're the subject matter of articles by men. They're the subject matter of photographs by men. When they start to produce their own articles, when they start to produce their own photographs, they're trying to kind of work out a way to be in that domain. And sometimes they're saying, oh, we're doing this differently because we're women. So sometimes women are kind of diminishing themselves, I think. There's some interesting kind of discourses where people talk about what women and men can do in camp, for example, in nudist camps. And some women say, of course, there's some jobs that only men can do, like putting up the signage and, digging the swimming pool. And then there's some jobs that women can do, and that's preparing the food, caring for children, and decorating an otherwise drab pavilion. You think, oh, okay, you're trying to represent women, but you're also like marginalizing women as being only decorative, caring, or,
nurturing,
concerned with kind of providing. So, even in places where women are kind of gaining a platform in nudism, there's still gender segregation. Yeah, and I think women's appearance is constantly judged in nudism. It's a massive stumbling block, I think, for sort of some of those principles of egalitarianism that are kind of there in nudism right from the beginning. From the 20s, people saying, if we cast off our clothes, we'll create a more equal world. Class will disappear. Gender barriers will disappear. These utopian beliefs about what taking your clothes off can do. The early nudists really strongly believed it would deliver the promise that they wanted to see of a peaceful, equal world. I think they were quite naive.
Oh, I don't know. That's what I see.
Well, I mean, I think it can help with all sorts of things, but I don't think it can do everything. It can't rid the world of prejudice in a single gesture, but it can get some way towards some of those things happening. It can break down some barriers between people. But the sort of stumbling block they soon discovered was you take your clothes off and still class barriers are visible, still gender differentials happen, still there's racial inequality. So I think it's trying to work out what it can contribute to and what is perhaps impossible.
Or what people take out of it, really, I suppose, as well. I have not witnessed in any sort of naturist environment any women bitching about another woman. I've not seen it. I've not heard it. It's like it's an unwritten rule about another woman's appearance, and I quite like that. Whereas get a group together of textile friends, you might go, well, she wear it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And there's a whole culture, obviously, of kind of women's magazines that critique other women's bodies, and it's women writing about women's bodies, women writing about women's appearance, women writing for female audiences, and the takedown of other women is so intense in some of those environments. So it's really interesting to hear that you've never had that experience in a nudist camp.
It's like we're giving women a leg up now. It's like we're supporting each other, or straightening the tiara is one way of looking at it. We're sort of empowering each other and helping each other out. And I like that. That's half the reason why I've subscribed to this naturism, because of the authenticity, the genuine friendships that I've not experienced anywhere else. It's incredible, actually.
That's really fascinating. And I wonder whether it's to do with the sort of inherent vulnerability when everyone's got their clothes off together, that everyone's sort of mutually vulnerable. So everyone needs to be mutually supportive.
And respectful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe that quite a lot. Yeah. Right. There's two more things just to finish up with. Based on what you've discovered through research, what might help women feel more confident, seen, or represented in nature spaces? Is it more conversations like we're having, or what do you think?
I'm not sure that I can answer that from a present day perspective, because I don't have the sort of inside view that you have. But I liked what you said about, well, I mean, you said it in quite an abrasive and amusing way, where you said men shut up. I think it is really important that women are given platforms where they're handed the mic, where they're given spaces, because, it's just really important to hear a different perspective and not always to wait for women to argue their way to the front. So many kinds of feminist practices have created women-only spaces or places where women are given a platform And you might have to at first kind of artificially do that to create an environment where women feel safe enough to say what they want and need. But if women feel safe enough, then they will speak up. And in a mixed gender environment where men dominate the conversation, some women don't feel confident enough to speak up. There's so much research done. This is nothing to do with naturism. This is to do with how women operate in kind of mixed environments, say in the workplace, where women won't speak up in meetings. They'll be full of good ideas, but they'll feel talked over. They won't feel like they're offered a platform unless a structure is put in place that enables everyone to, have a moment on the microphone or have a moment to say what they want. So there's all sorts of ways in which women get intimidated, spoken over, have their ideas co-opted, have their ideas dismissed. So I think it's probably the same for naturism, what you're doing in providing women-only holidays. It's not the only answer, but it's spaces where women might gain in confidence. They might be able to take a first step.
Yeah.
Having these kinds of podcast spaces, having representatives on committees that represent women's voices, having articles dedicated to women's experiences and women's perspectives in the magazines. That seems to be a really important thing. And I think, having role models, having people like you talking about your own experiences and talking really candidly and authentically about your own vulnerabilities, your own uncertainties, your own journey, that seems to me really important to have, because if you don't see people doing it, you can't be it. So I think many of the sort of structures that you're talking about are structures that apply across the board to many organisations, to many kinds of interest groups. And so I think, naturism can learn from and practice those things that we know work more broadly for other organisations and other practices.
The women-only offerings is to provide women an entry level, really, in a safe, familiar, you're with other women environment. And it's a good stepping stone to sort of get women into other naturist organisations where eventually they may be like me and become gender blind.
Yeah.
But it's stepping stones, and it's providing an entry, really, of something they may not have considered before in a safe space.
Yeah.
And then finally, Annebella, what do you hope listeners, especially women, will take away from your work?
I'm always hoping that the kind of histories that I write provide reflections for the present. I don't just do that work to go, oh, look, this thing happened over there, let's just leave it over there. I always want to think, well, what are the kind of lessons that looking at this stuff can tell us in the present day? And so even though I said right at the very beginning, I didn't write this book necessarily with naturists in mind. I was writing it from a non-naturist perspective. And also I was kind of conscious that non-naturists might read it, and I hoped they would read it. I've been really interested when naturists like yourself have engaged with it and what they see as kind of lessons they can learn from it. So I suppose I would say that for women in naturism today, I would say what I've learned is that women were always there. They were there right from the very beginning, and that some of the kind of feminist concerns of the 21st century about giving women a space and a platform, that was part of the discussion 100 years ago. This kind of moment of opportunity where nudism might kind of provide a sort of feminist opportunity, that was there really surprisingly 100 years ago. Women were in smaller numbers throughout naturist history, but they made really distinctive and really valuable contributions. So they were practitioners, they were co-owners of clubs, they were co-organisers of clubs. They built them from scratch with their partners, with their families. They were organisers, they were vocal contributors to magazines, they were writers, they were editors, they were models, and they ran model agencies. They were photographers and they photographed women as models. So they were all these roles all at once. They were not just kind of the pretty naked figure in front of the camera. They were behind the camera. They held the pen. They held the microphone. They kind of created platforms for women like yourself to follow. And they often did it in the face of being kind of marginalised. They were definitely minoritised in the sense that they were smaller in number. But they kind of carved out spaces, and they were doing that for very self-serving reasons because they wanted to create a community that they would feel a part of, but they kind of paved the way for later generations to have, I think, healthier and happier attitudes to bodies. So I think, they were pioneering because they did it when numbers were small and they did it when ridicule and hostility was high. So I think, they really were kind of pioneering thinkers and practitioners and cultural producers. So, I like to make sure that we hear their voices. And in my book, I tried wherever I could to kind of foreground those women, even if they were fewer in number and fewer and further in between than the male voices. I tried to kind of listen out for them and take their thoughts and their practices seriously because, they were always there, and what they're thinking about and fighting for is similar to what you're thinking about and fighting for.
Yeah, I'm just doing it online now.
Yeah.
And ignore the comments. You've got to have a thick skin for this.
Yes, yeah, quite. And I think, maybe the hostility is higher now. Certainly the platform for the hostile people to sneer and insult, those opportunities, those kind of social media opportunities probably make it even tougher now.
So with 4 years of being online and, on social media platforms, at first my DM box was full of dick pics, but I've got zero tolerance for that. I block them. I'm not interested, thank you. I haven't given you permission to direct message me this. Can you not?
No.
And I think sort of 3 or 4 years later, I hardly get any now, which is great. I even closed an Instagram account I had because people are actually calling me via it. And it was invasive. So I have got another Instagram account now. So it's changed even in the last 4 or 5 years.
I'm sorry to hear that you get that, but I know that many women who write about anything to do with nudity and bodies and sexuality get this, and especially because, you're appearing as a nude person in a public space. I'm not so naive as to think that you wouldn't get that, but I'm sorry to hear that you do get that. I've been lucky in that I have had a lot of contact with people who know about my work, who know that I write about nudist practices. I've had very, very little, in the sort of field of what you're describing. I've had 1 or 2 people who've sort of got in contact with me under the ruse of kind of discussing my interests and have kind of very quickly become obvious that they want to discuss things about my body rather than my research about bodies. But that's hardly ever happens. And I have to say that all of the nudists that I have met, or naturists that I've met, especially naturist men, almost all of them, like 99% of them, have been incredibly respectful. They've often been older kind of gentlemen, retired academics, librarians, quite respectable people. They've been people who've been interested in sort of talking about research practices and correcting some aspect of some minor grammar point I might have made an error on, or, just engaging me in the kind of discussion about history. So I've had some very happy dialogue, I will say, with people who've approached me from the nudist community. But then I'm very, very careful about who I follow back on social media.
Oh, yeah, so am I, yeah.
I'm aware that if someone follows you and you follow them back, they can then start messaging you. So I'm quite cautious about that. And I can see from some of the people who've followed me that they've got a different perspective on the naked body to the one that I've got. So they can follow me, but I don't follow them back.
Right,
so
same.
Yeah, I've been lucky enough to have not had that kind of affront happening in any of my inboxes, I'm pleased to say.
Yes, well, it's been a while since I've had anything like that. And obviously, clearly not from naturists.
Yeah.
Right, well, this has been brilliant.
I've loved talking to you. I'm really interested in what you do. Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed myself. It's an honour to be on your podcast. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's an honour to have you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, Annebella. What an amazing conversation. There's so much to unpack there. Indeed, I've invited Siobhan Hassan to come and have a chat with me to kind of unpick some of the things that Annebella and I discussed. So without further ado, please welcome Siobhan. She's the co-chair of the Christian Naturist Fellowship. So welcome back to Siobhan. I so wanted to have you back, Siobhan. So hello.
Hello, how are you? It's good to be back.
I'm very good. So we've had a chance to listen to Annebella, and she's made some very, very interesting points. But one that flagged up to me in particular that I want to get your thoughts on is when she mentioned a book written by Maurice Parmelee. I believe he was an American philosopher that wrote this book 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And in it, he argues that nudism is a powerful aid to feminism because it abolishes the artificial and unnecessary sex barrier and distinction of dress. And he said the movement is indeed the logical continuation and consummation of the women's movement. So this guy wrote this nearly 100 years ago. Do you think things have moved on, or are we still fighting the fight? Was Maurice Parmelee ahead of his time? What do you think?
Well, I think we are still fighting the fight, if I'm honest. I think some things have changed. I think women feel a bit more empowered than perhaps they did in 1929. But I think he was ahead of his time.
Yeah.
But I can imagine women of the time reading it and thinking, this is nice to hear a man come out and speak this way.
What I do think has changed in the 100 years, women back then would have probably had far more backlash than you and I get for speaking publicly about naturism, nudism. There was the fear of what your neighbours thought, the fear of bringing your husband's name into disrepute or anything like that. So in terms of progression, yes, nudism, naturism is still something people guffaw and laugh about, but it doesn't, I don't think, have the same negativity that perhaps it did back then.
I agree. I think what has changed is attitudes within the world of naturism. I'm not sure how much has changed within the textile world, but then I'm guessing people in the textile world don't read books about naturism unless they're interested in being naturists themselves. I mean, in terms of attitudes towards naturism.
Yeah.
If you see what I mean.
No, yeah, I do. I mean, yeah, you wouldn't necessarily pick up a naturism book unless you had some iota of interest.
Yeah, or you were trying to understand why your friend's gone weird and gone into naturism all of a sudden.
Funny you should say that, actually. I don't know if you've ever heard of Jim and Kim. They're American.
Yes.
Yeah.
Know Jim and Kim very well.
Yes. And they were called in to rescue a family member who turned to nudism. And they were like, okay, let me just do a Bible study on it first before I intervene. And the rest is history. They could find nothing in the Bible that condemned naturism. So,
exactly.
And they're fully 100% behind it now. So it's just like, be careful what you wish for.
More than 100% behind it. I love Jim and Kim. They're great.
So,
but people do find that, don't they? They try and make an argument against it. Particularly Christians try and make an argument against it and then can't.
Yeah, because I mean, you know yourself with your position within the Christian Naturist Fellowship.
Yeah.
People, particularly, you must encounter this, one, as a woman, two, as a Christian believer, people thinking, oh my God, why are you doing that? You're a woman, or why are you doing that? You're religious. So how would you counteract that?
Yeah, I get those questions quite a lot. As far as Christian questions coming up, and questions go from pastors and pastors saying, I don't want you in my church if why you do naturism.
Do they pass the buck?
Pass the buck, yeah. Exactly. Brilliant. I love that.
Sorry.
As far as that's concerned, I would say, go and find me a biblical argument that backs up what you're saying. Just like Kim and Jim found out. Yeah, there isn't one. And modesty, which I'm guessing some of the women in 1929, this would have been one of the things that they would be dealing with, is the idea of modesty. Modesty, to me, is not a state of dress, it's a state of mind. So that's also my argument when people say, well, as a woman, shouldn't you be modest? Shouldn't you be a bit more modest? I'm like, well, I think I am quite modest because it's about a state of mind, it's not about a state of dress.
But then people could and would argue that modesty is a state of dress, because if you were to walk to Sainsbury's in a very tight dress with your cleavage hanging out, that's not modesty, is it?
Well, it's not modesty in the way that we understand.
Right.
We use the word in that context.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's, again, as women, something we're fighting all the time, what we wear. It's better off not wearing anything.
Well, yeah, but, men seem to not have this question of what's modest and what's not modest. But I would argue that going to Sainsbury's
or other supermarkets are available.
or other supermarkets are available in a pair of shorts with your cleavage all hanging out is more about dressing provocatively, and I think we maybe mix the word modesty with what's provoking and what's not provoking.
True. And I suppose if we are talking almost 100 years ago as well, they didn't have the clothing as such that would have been considered immodest. Is that the right word?
Yeah.
So,
Except for only ladies of the night, as they would have been called.
but even so, by comparison, they wouldn't have had the same choice of outfits available.
No.
Which, again, is a whole nother level of judging and a judgment tool, clothing as a judgment tool, which has developed from whatever it was like 100 years ago to now, where anything goes pretty much, if you're willing to accept the judgment for it.
Exactly. But I feel, though, people would benefit from reading Nudism in Modern Life now, because I feel like there's almost starting to be a turnaround back to what's acceptable and what's not. Not in the same way, but in that if you look like thin, I don't know if you've seen all these ads for Tai Chi on the internet. There's this woman who goes, I bet you never thought a granny at 70 could look like this. And she's clearly 35. But anyway, there's all this thing now where you're supposed to look perfect, and aiming to be perfect is the thing. And then I think, well, perfect for who? What's happened to the feminist movement about a woman being okay with herself as she is and emancipated and all the rest? But now there seems to be that real movement back towards, well, if you haven't got a bum that you can put a tray of biscuits on, it's...
Yeah, I see what you're saying. And this is what we've been saying for years and years, is the things that we see in mainstream media, on Instagram, on all the socials, is an unachievable, unrealistic beauty standard.
Yeah.
Whose beauty standard, though?
Exactly that. Whose beauty standard? And for who? For yourself. If you're doing it for yourself and you think, yeah, I look absolutely amazing and I'm very happy with myself, then good on you and carry on. But I'm not sure that's always the case.
No. And if we go back again to Maurice Parmelee, all he was suggesting, it feels, is for women to join in, to be the same as the men. He's saying that you're stripping off your clothes, you're all the same. It doesn't matter what bits and bobs you've got.
Yeah.
You're the same. It's a leveler. And any genuine naturist will tell you the same.
Exactly.
100 years later.
Exactly. Exactly. So, what he was saying, I guess, is one thing we have achieved. I mean, I don't know if women then felt as free to be naturists as we do.
I think then, the Naturist Club was born, and it was all sort of behind high fences, private, like a utopian world outside of their ordinary lives.
Yeah.
And that's how they wanted it, for fear of the things we spoke about earlier.
Yeah.
What the outside world thinks, and keeping it all very private and discreet. Now, things have moved on in 100 years.
Yeah.
On the whole, I can go out and publicly tell somebody I'm a naturist, and I don't get that, oh my God, we can't employ her sort of thing, or she's fired because she's a naturist, that sort of thing. And that's because more and more people are talking about it, and it does take people to talk about it. And one thing, I think you agree with me on this one, is if we're ashamed of naturism, how can we expect anybody else to understand it?
100%. I agree with you on that. And especially as a Christian and a pastor, if I'm not telling people that I'm a naturist, then I'm saying there's some shame in it.
Yeah.
And there isn't, but there are people who feel they can't, they're teachers and whatever, and they feel, well, I can't say because I might get sacked. But I do think that's more of a misconception on our part. I mean, naturists on our part, rather than that's how people actually react. Mostly people go, all right, so you take your clothes off.
Or you get, why?
Yeah, or I could never do that.
Yeah, or here's a good one, I don't have the body for that.
Yeah, exactly. I had somebody say that to me, and I am a larger naturist woman, and this woman was very slim, a friend of mine, and she said, oh, I could not with my body, I couldn't take my clothes off. I was like, I do, and no one gives a monkeys,
So Maurice Parmelee obviously had a vision of a philosophy that he believed in 100 years ago. I think if you're reading the book now, you'd probably still agree with him.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, when I was reading what you sent me, I thought he's absolutely right.
Yeah.
And again, I will say what I said at the start, to hear a man come out in favor of feminism, when a man's a feminist, it carries more gravitas. And people go, oh, so a man thinks that. And of course, a man speaking out intelligently on women's issues is...
And that's a really good point to end with. Men could do a lot to support women in naturism. Rather than break the fact there aren't enough women in naturism, let's support the ones that are here. Yeah.
Amen.
And if we're comfortable enough to speak about it, eventually it's going to help someone somewhere at some point.
100%.
And that's all we can do. We can't convert everybody, and that's not our intention.
Oh, exactly.
But it is to be able to offer people the choice to give it a go.
Yeah.
If you don't like it, get dressed.
Well, funny enough, most people don't once they've tried it.
Exactly. I haven't met one yet.
No, me neither, funny enough. Helen, just want to say that I've said this many times and I will continue to say it. You are so important. The work that you do and the way that you do it is very helpful, is too small a word. What you do is amazing and really helps women to be able to be more open about it. And I just think you're absolutely fantastic. And so thank you for what you do.
Oh, thank you. But there's a team of us, you know that, and you're a big part of it.
But you're leading the team and you won't let us rest, which is a great thing, which is a great thing. You're like, come on, keep talking about it.
I just think it's a subject that can go on and on. If I felt that I was running out of things to say, then I would stop. But I'm learning new stuff myself all the time. And there's so many stories out there, so many voices to be heard, different journeys. We're showing that naturism isn't for one type of person, it's for everybody. And yes, I'm a women's officer, but I just think I'm for the people.
You are for the people.
And once we get the women in, we know for ourselves, we were both very reluctant to give it a try initially.
Really, yeah.
And the confidence we've both got, the freedom, the friends that we've made, all of these wonderful, wonderful things. It was so unlike what I thought it was going to be like, which is why I keep talking about it.
Yeah. And I'm glad you do. And that's exactly right. And that's why I want to talk about it too, because I am a larger woman and I think it does, pardon the pun, it does carry some weight. When a larger woman is saying it's okay to take your clothes off, I think it says something.
Yeah, because it's not about the physicalities of being nude necessarily. No. I mean, yes, we like the feeling of going for a swim without a costume on, and it's nice to go for a walk and feel the elements.
Yeah.
But it's more than that. It's very difficult to verbalize it until you've done it yourself. It's friendship.
Yes.
Being yourself, being okay with yourself, and knowing I'm not fat, I just have some fat.
Yes, exactly.
I've heard someone say that to me before, and I'm like, yeah, very good. Yeah. Like, you wouldn't go up to someone, hello, I'm fat. No, my name's Helen, I'm carrying some fat. That's it.
No, that's a really good way of putting it, isn't it? Yeah.
Anyway, Siobhan, thank you, my lovely.
You're welcome. Always a pleasure. God bless.
Thank you so much to Siobhan. So today's conversation with both Annebella and Siobhan highlights a powerful truth that naturism has been long intertwined with ideas of equality, freedom, and challenging societal expectations. Women have been central to that journey, helping shape the movement in ways that continue to influence it today. I find it fascinating that 100 years on, we're talking about the same things that Maurice Parmelee mentioned in his book. And while Siobhan reminded us challenges still remain, there is also progress, resilience, and a strong sense of community. The story of women in naturism is still being written, and its next chapter is already unfolding. If this conversation has resonated with you, you can find more episodes, resources and ways to get involved by visiting the British Naturism website and following us on social media. And if you're interested in taking part in a women-only experience, there are currently just 2 spaces left on our next women-only clothing optional holiday in Vitramatis, Crete. You can email the show to find out more details. And finally, don't forget to like, subscribe, thumbs up, love hearts, or follow the podcast wherever you're listening. It really helps people to discover these conversations, and we'd also love to hear your thoughts and experiences. If you want to appear on the Women in Focus podcast or any suggestions of who you'd like to hear from, please get in touch. You've been listening to Women in Focus. I've been your host, Helen Berryman, and join me next time as we bring more Women in Focus.